Welcome back everyone. The iPhone 6s Plus is one of those phones that came out a couple of years ago. It's definitely not a brand new iPhone anymore, but this iPhone is still legendary in its own right, mostly because it's still supported with software, and it's actually a pretty important phone to me because I actually did use it as a main device for several months. I don't know if it was a year, I honestly don't even remember that much about it, but it was a very good phone when I owned it, and it was the second iPhone that I used as a main device, and in 2022 it's still running. It still has software support, which is really interesting. So let's go and see if this phone is still worth it. Now, I will leave some phones that I love this year linked down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the body of this phone, as I've always mentioned, this is a beautiful device. It has a beautiful 5.5-inch panel on the front and it still looks pretty good. Now, of course, it has a lot of bezel on it. It doesn't look like the latest and greatest iPhone anymore, but when you do consider that this thing came out in 2015, which was almost 7 years ago, it isn't, an ugly looking device. Of course, if a phone came out this year, which the 2022 iPhone SE is going to look like this probably, that's going to look outdated, but the 6s Plus doesn't look ugly. You have a lot of bezel, but it's totally okay. You have a home button with Touch ID on it, which was really nice, and that really pretty much covers it up on the front. You have the lightning port and the headphone jack on the bottom of this iPhone, and this was actually one of the last iPhones, or the last iPhone, to bring a headphone jack, which is also very interesting. Now, on the back of this iPhone, we have the aluminum back on it, which in my opinion looks beautiful. The rose gold color of this iPhone was one of my favorite designed iPhones of all time, and it still looks pretty good for the most part. Now, we don't have wireless charging, we don't really have IP certification either, so it isn't the most durable iPhone, but it's still kind of good for the most part. You also have Force Touch on this display as well, which is very interesting because we don't really have 3D Touch on the latest iPhones. We just have that, we can hold it down and kind of go from there. Now, moving on to the camera setup of this iPhone, this device had that single 12 megapixel camera on the back, and this is a very interesting lens because this was the first iPhone to bring 4K at 30. Since then, we've gotten 4K on pretty much every single iPhone, but this was the first one to bring it, at least on the back. On the front, we do have a 5 megapixel 720p camera, so definitely not the best front-facing camera, but one thing I will tell you is that this lens is still okay for the most part. Even for the age and everything, I feel like it could have been a little bit better, to be honest. Of course, this was a pretty big difference from the 6 Plus to the 6s Plus, so it did bring a lot to the table just from that standpoint. And since then, basically all iPhone cameras have had 12 megapixel lenses, so this one is kind of future-proof there. Now, this thing lacks in a ton of different features. First of all, it doesn't have any other lens besides that single 12 megapixel lens. It doesn't have portrait mode or cinematic mode or any other pro feature that we have nowadays. So when we compare the latest camera to this one, of course it's missing on pretty much every single one of those features, but it isn't a bad camera for its age and the price, so that's a big thing to keep in mind. But if we are comparing it to the iPhones that just came out, of course it isn't the best performing camera anymore. So if you're okay with getting really weird, inconsistent photos sometimes, then this thing probably wouldn't be a big deal to you, but the videos are grainy, the photos are grainy, and those are some pretty big things to keep in mind. So in terms of the camera, that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the longevity of this iPhone, this is the one area of this device which has pretty much shocked me and probably everyone else as well. The iPhone 6s Plus is one of the most longest supported iPhones of all time. For full OS updates, it started off with iOS 9. Right now it's on iOS 15, and I don't think it's going to get iOS 16, which is totally okay. This device lasted like 3 more versions of iOS than its predecessor. So the 6 Plus stopped support in 2000 with iOS 12. That was 3 iOS versions ago. Since then, we got iOS 13, iOS 14, and iOS 15, and the iPhone 6s Plus has gotten every single one of those updates. So it's still getting support. These devices get the same updates as the iPhone 13 Pro Max that just came out. Now, of course, the 13 Pro Max is going to outlive this thing, but it is pretty crazy that the 6s Plus is still getting software support. Now, the future of this device, like I mentioned, it isn't probably going to be getting iOS 16. That's what all the rumors are stating. And because of that, that is pretty much the main reason why I wouldn't recommend buying an iPhone 6s Plus anymore. And at the very least, I would recommend going up to something like an iPhone 7 Plus. That's going to be a much better future-proofed phone. But the fact that the 6s Plus is still somewhat supported is pretty crazy to me. And because of that, this iPhone is a legend just in that standpoint alone. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now, hitting on the performance side of things, this device has that Apple A9 chip inside of it with 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, another big thing about this phone was that this was the first iPhone to bring that 2 gigs of RAM. Since then, we've gotten 2 and more gigabytes of RAM, but this was the first iPhone to bring it, so that's another really cool thing about this device. Now, I will tell you in terms of the performance side of things, it's definitely not a great performing phone anymore. It's definitely, is showing its age, and I think that's the best way to put it. I did compare this thing to the iPhone 13s, the iPhone 12s, the iPhone 11s, the iPhone 10s every single year, and it definitely does show its age. It's not faster than those iPhones. I think there was one time like in 2019 or something, I saw that the 6S Plus was beating my iPhone 10 or iPhone 8 Plus at that time, but beyond that, this phone really isn't worth it anymore in terms of performance. For light tasks like, opening emails and doing texts and FaceTimes and stuff like that, overall, it's going to be able to handle those type of things. But if you try to even step up to something, like heavier intensive gaming or different things like that, it is kind of a glitchy experience. It's not horrible. It's definitely better than my iPhone 6 Plus, but it is showing its age. And I think that's the best way to put it. On top of that, the 2 gigs of RAM at that time was a lot, but now it is kind of, showing its age in the RAM management portion as well. A lot of apps do crash in the background, and even getting into like the multitasking panel and kind of maneuvering through there, that is also kind of an annoying process as well. And it does actually, kind of glitch up here and there. And if I had to use this phone every day, I probably could deal with it, but I would probably use my MacBook a lot more and try to avoid using my iPhone 6s Plus just because it is kind of, showing its age there. However, a big thing to keep in mind is that iOS 15 has pretty much, kind of hit on a lot of different iPhones, so the performance may get better throughout time. Once iOS 15 kind of matures, maybe it'll probably get better, and maybe a year from now, once iOS 15 is still supported on this phone and it's getting security updates, maybe it'll get better in that standpoint as well. I'm not 100% too sure, but I guess we'll see what happens in the future. So in terms of the performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now hitting on the battery life, this device has that 2,750 mAh battery, and since then I will tell you my iPhone 6s Plus has definitely gone down in the battery department. It isn't what it used to be. It's definitely showing its age there as well, but that's expected. When you have an older iPhone like this that's been out for like 7 years, it's definitely going to start showing its age, and that's a pretty big thing to keep in mind as well. If you are around a charger, then I don't think it'll be that big of a deal, but if you are somebody who is going to be having like an iPhone 6s Plus in this day and age, just do keep in mind that the battery life isn't going to be that great, and that may be a problem for a lot of you. So in terms of that covers it up in the battery standpoint. And on top of everything, what I will tell you is that the iPhone 6s Plus is a legendary device, but just because it's a legend doesn't mean you should still pick it up. This device, came out in 2015. It's been supported for many years, and I will tell you, this is still a very good device just because the year and everything that it came out with. However, I wouldn't really recommend picking this thing up anymore, mostly because it really isn't that great of a device anymore. The performance isn't that great, the battery life isn't that great, and it does have a lot of issues. But beyond that, this is still a pretty interesting device, and I'm actually a huge fan of it. I just probably wouldn't recommend using it, but it is a legend, so that pretty much covers it up there. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly, everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.